it was the kind of thing, the bike either fell apart or, yeah, I could win the race by 5 or 10 minutes.
Welcome back, guys. Podcast is back. Took some time off this summer to do a little racing, a little bit of work, had another baby, just some family time. We're back this week with Svein Tuft. He's an all-time Canadian cyclist, racing over in Europe, racing the Tour de France. Got his start riding his mountain bike in BC with a trailer and his dog just to go rock climbing, just to ride up into the mountains. He'd ride to Alaska, down to Mexico, a fairly unorthodox approach or intro into the cycling world. Lately, he's been doing some ultra endurance races in BC through the mountains, winning those races. He's got some wild stories. Enjoy. Appreciate you coming on. I discovered you. Again, I don't follow bicycle racing or bike racing that closely, but getting into it more and more over the past 5 years. And my buddy Steph is telling me to follow along in these two crazy races he's doing. And I see this guy out front that is just blowing everyone away. And, I guess the Buckshot, I'm like, okay, maybe Steph can catch him. And then, an hour into the race, I realize he's got no chance. And then you guys do 1,000-kilometer race, and it was just mind blowing, your performance there. So, I started to dig deeper, and then, kind of looking at your story and realizing who you were, and, oh man, I gotta have this guy on the podcast. He's, one of a kind dude. So I guess we'll start at the beginning. I usually, with all my race car drivers, I want to understand, their childhood, what their environment was like growing up. So I guess tell me, where you grew up, what your parents did for a living, kind of paint the picture a little bit of what your childhood looked like.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, my early years, when I think of a lot of the colleagues I raced with over the years, it was not the typical build up to like a world tour bike racing life. I was not at all, switched on to any of that stuff. I was very late to the game. um, but I had a great life as a young man. Grew up in South Langley, British Columbia, when it was still quite rural. I mean, it still is out there down near 8th Avenue, but really good life. My parents were awesome. They a big emphasis for us was just doing stuff outside all the time, doing activities. Yeah, like I think of my earlier years, like since I was 3, we had like a little motorhome, and we'd go up to Manning Park, and which is just a small ski mountain, that family mountain. And yeah, we'd spend our weekends up there, and yeah, so really just a really nice upbringing, I would say, something I'm trying to pass along to my kids now, just because I think that connection to nature and being outside and doing a lot of different activities, not like just honing in on one and like forcing them to do one thing. I think it's a really important thing. Yeah. So as I went through school, a pretty normal school. And then as I got into grade 8, grade 9, I was like into skateboarding and snowboarding and skiing. Those mountain sports were always kind of a part of my life, but then the skateboarding really took over, and that was like this other sense of freedom. I don't know if anyone out there has been a skateboarder as a younger man, but it's just like you have this freedom in these cities, and you're moving around at night in groups, and yeah, it really captured me. But at that same time, I was, my parents were separating, and it was a weird time. You're 15 years old, and it's already like a strange time as a young person. And yeah, I was just felt kind of like, well, that foundation gets taken away from you, that kind of solid family foundation, and you're just kind of yeah, it's a strange time. So anyways, I was relying a lot on my friends, and at the same time I got into mountain climbing and rock climbing, and I really started despising school. It just felt like a prison to me. I would be sitting in there on these beautiful bluebird days and just looking out the window, going like, "Why am I here? This is the worst." And so, yeah, I started doing trips where I'd just disappear, because that was the other thing with my parents not speaking to each other. I could kind of play them against each other, which, that's not the best, but that was just how it was. I was able to disappear for like a week at a time. And then, then eventually the letters from the school would come out and everyone would be flipping out. But yeah, it wasn't like I was doing anything bad. I was just off climbing mountains. And, in that process of climbing mountains is when I actually first found the beauty of the bike. And yeah, so a big part of that was just I had these jobs, these kind of crappy jobs, cleaning up a gas station or hay baling or working at a butcher, and like just the random jobs you do as a young man. And it was like, even like it wasn't even bad in those days, like insuring a car and owning a vehicle or whatever. But yeah, it was a big part of the expenses. And I I I bought a bike at Value Village, a crappy old 10 speed, and I welded up a trailer. I had a big dog, and I did my first trip up to. Well, first of all, I started small. I went to like out to the Chilliwack Valley, did some climbs, and I was fascinated just by, it still took a while to get out there, but it wasn't that bad, and I still had all of the things that I needed to do my trip. And then that got me going to like, oh, I'd like to go to Bella Coola, see the Chilcotin Plateau and that whole Chilcotin range. And so I did that very late in the year. So again, just inexperienced, not knowing things, and yeah, just ran into every problem you can run into with the bike. Everything broke. I mean, it was not a good bike, so it's no surprise. And yeah, in that trip, everything went sideways. I lost, like, I had no money, but I lost a little bag of cash I had on this jacket that I'd tied to my trailer, and it fell off somewhere, like way early on in the morning somewhere. And like I realized that by the evening wasn't enough to go back for. And that's like,
Yeah.
so I started like picking up cans and like hobo lifestyle. I was picking up cans, and then I made it to like Williams Lake, and I traded in all my cans for like some potatoes and, just enough food to make it for the next leg of the trip. And that's when okay, I wasn't stoked on like picking up cans, but I realized the freedom that a bike offers. And then I was, okay, I always loved climbing mountains, but then it became about the freedom of traveling with a bike.
Hmm.
And that's what really captured me. And then from there, I was, my next trip was up to Alaska, down to Mexico. And
Holy
yeah, I
cow.
was just living on the bike, and, coming home for short periods, like over the winter, and working to save up to like kind of fund those trips. And
Was it what sorry, was that all like your own inspiration from the last trip? You want to do one bigger, or are you, reading Jack Kerouac, or, at the time,
yeah,
thinking about all these other guys who have done stuff like this?
a little bit of it all. I was always fascinated to read like adventure stories, like guys who've been out there. Like, I think back to a guy, maybe you've never heard of him, but Reinhold Messner is like one of the first like real big alpine climbers to do all like the peaks over 8,000 meters with no oxygen and like solo and all those things. Like,
Mm,
so, that guy was, I loved the guys who were taking the conventional wisdom at the time and going like, nah, I'm not doing it that way. Like, and then they would go and do it. And then it just changes the mold forever, right? It's just like
right.
the whole idea of breaking the 4 minute mile. No, it's not possible. It's not, everything's not possible. And it's like, no, you have these guys who come along and just don't believe that shit, and they go and do it. So I love those stories. And I didn't think I was anything like, oh, I was some great explorer. I knew it all been done, but it was just
Sure.
that sense of freedom. And at the time I was really, like those ages of like 17, 18, 9, they're strange ages. You think you know a lot of things, and uh, yeah, you definitely don't know anything. And I don't claim to know more now, but definitely have had a lot more experience. um, so yeah, like I really learned a lot in that whole phase of my life, and it's something I always look back on now with just that freedom. Like my I love my life now. I have kids, I have family, get to do awesome stuff a lot of the time, but it's different. And there was a freedom and like yeah, like that I just can't seem to touch right now. Because I think back uh, to that time, there was no smartphones, there was no internet, there was no
Mm.
nothing. I always make the joke like I would call my mom with a calling card from some random, you'd be in some village, tiny, small town out in the middle of nowhere, way up north in the Yukon somewhere, and they'd have one of those little telephone booths or a little phone attached to the side of the gas station, and you'd punch in your code and go through all the rigmarole to make the call, and yeah, you'd give an update to home, and that's just how it was. There was no pictures, and like the best I had was one of those, the old like kind of throwaway cameras, right? You you
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
roll them up and click, and so I wish I had way more documenting of that time, but that was how it was in those days, and yeah, there was a real freedom, and in that process, I realized that I was a bit of a hammerhead in the sense that I like to push myself.
Mm.
And so while I didn't have any objective, like I knew I wanted to get to Alaska, I didn't know what that meant because I'd never been there. And then the day to day became kind of like a challenge. Like how far could I go? Because like initially when you just get on a bike, just to ride 50K, it's like holy, and then
Right.
everything's kind of sore, and there's this adaptation process, and like me, I was a dummy. I would take on these epic trips and just like with no riding and just go like, yeah, okay, I'll go, no chamois, no nothing, and so yeah, everything was kind of the hard way, but those are good lessons I think as a young person. I think it's part of I always think it's part of the problem now with our current society is that we don't do hard things that much anymore, and we don't challenge or have objectives as much. That's why I think sports so important for young people. But anyways, that's a whole other tangent. Uh, I had this interesting job uh, when I came home one winter from one of my trips. A friend had a secondhand store that it was like a sports store, but it's like it had a big emphasis on bikes, used bikes, and things like that. And so I was living in the shop underneath the stairwell, kind of. So it was a really sweet deal for me
Yeah.
because rent was covered, and yeah, just kind of living the life and working through the winter, And I again that so that when I talk about that freedom, I talk about time as being this commodity that was just so it was just so spare in those days. Like you just had so much, and you just never thought it was going to be an issue, right?
Yeah.
And it's something I yeah, it's hard to have that same feeling. So, anyways, working at this shop, and in that process, I try out. A friend had a Cannondale kind of triathlon, road bike with Spinergy wheels, like really fast setup in those days.
Hmm.
And I got out on the Langley bypass there, and I was like immediately doing like 45K an hour, and I was just like, holy shit, this is all like the same power that it took me to move my dog and trailer and gear and mountain bike to go 18K an hour. I was now going like 45K an hour. And I was just like, this is insane. Like I was just so stoked. And that hooked me right there. And so
Hmm.
at this time, my dad, who, I hadn't been really, like I said, I was kind of taking off on these trips, and I wasn't really, the best communicating son, because I think there was still some resentment there, about the whole thing and just how family and life goes sometimes. And in those years, yeah, it wasn't the best, but we started hanging out a lot more. And my dad has a real sporting background. He's Norwegian. My grandfather went to the Olympics for cross country skiing,
Wow.
and also raced bikes in Norway. And I'd always known that, but because I didn't really care much about, I loved cross country skiing, but I wasn't like into sports in the competitive way.
So you played no competitive sports growing up,
Oh, I
really
did. I did
whatsoever? You
some
were
team
like a
sports.
skateboarding guy?
Yeah, I did team sports
Okay.
like when I was younger, like football and soccer, like the kind of standard things that you would do in Langley. I'm trying to think what else. No, it's like a lot of independent stuff.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so he kind of saw this new kind of focus and interest, because up to that point they just thought I was a. I mean, my next mission was to go down to South America. So they just thought I was completely lost. They would never see me again. So he kind of caught on to this, and he's just like, well, why don't we build up a road bike? Why don't like we have access to all these like parts, and we can, you know. So we built like a real, just started slapping pieces together, and just a real random mix. And all that time I'd been touring, I'd been building an engine for bike racing.
Mm,
And
right.
I didn't really realize that, but it applied very well to like those initial first races. But it was the kind of thing, the bike either fell apart, or yeah, I could win the race by 5 or 10 minutes. It was, and I had no understanding of bike racing. So when you're starting out in Cat 5, like there's not a lot of tactics. If you can just ride hard on a hard course, you can ride away from everyone. But if it's flat, and the other guys know race tactics or in drafting, you're kind of screwed. So yeah, again, just learn everything the hard way, and just smash myself. But I loved it right away. I loved it. And you get those first tastes of winning, and it changes you. It
Oh
changes
yeah.
you forever, right? You're just like, because I wasn't a guy like trying out there to compete with everyone. I was always kind of competing with myself. I had this notion of what I thought I could do, and I would always be up against that, my own thing. But then you go and you beat others, and it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. And then obviously as a human, other people are giving you accolades and high fives and whatever. So then that kind of becomes appealing as well. So then you start that whole journey of like chasing after, yeah, competition, sport, whatever, trying to
Right.
find out how to be the best. So yeah, that's kind of, a condensed version there.
No, that's great. So I gather you blew yourself up in a couple of those first races
Oh
and
yeah.
learned the hard way. When do you start getting the inkling or conceptualize some sort of path like, hey, I've got something here?
Yeah, there was a few things, early on where like I was lucky. I had like a once some older guys saw just like the dumb raw power, like they really kind of took me under their wings and started helping me out a lot, and that was really cool. It's really thanks to those guys that I was able to progress as quickly as I did. And then there was just like a few flashes, but I think the big one was in my second year. I was racing. Yeah, it was quite a year. I was with an American team, so it's kind of like an amateur pro. Like it's a funny thing because you're not really getting paid. You're getting some
Sure.
money
Yeah.
to kind of live, but in those days you could go from crit to crit, make some cash, and you could make it work. But it
Right.
was definitely no extravagant lifestyle. And then I also was doing stuff with the national team, and I got a stagiaire position with Mercury. So I went and raced in Europe. Like, yeah, it was just like a whirlwind of a year. It's not normal to go and race. Like, basically, I was doing world tour races by the end of my second season.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, like, I'd gone and done like GP Plouay and like, yeah, Tour de l'Avenir and these different kind of races that were, and at that time, very high level. which I was just getting my head kicked in. Don't let's not kid ourselves here. I was just crashing and getting dropped and just a mess out there. So that was, that's just part of it. But what happened was that year we have a big stage race in Canada called Tour de Beauce out in Quebec, and that's a really important one. It still is an important one, but in those days there used to be real like big professional teams from America and Europe used to come over,
Hmm.
and that was kind of my first year. I was with the national team, and I was second on a stage with like a really well known Euro pro, Hank Vogels. We rode away like from the group, and anyways, he beat me because he's just that much better. But then, like, so that was okay result, I kind of like people could say, oh yeah, you made it in a breakaway and you barely hung on and you got second, which is fair. You could say that, but then the final stage of that race is a super hard one. It's a city circuit with big climbs in it. It's just gnarly weather. It's kind of renowned as like the hardest stage of the whole thing, and I won that solo, which then I was like, oh, okay, I might actually be okay at this sport, and that I think that was, if I think of the catalyst for it all, that was the one moment that really stands out for me that I was like, oh, yeah, I think I can do this now. Because, I had, like some experience going to Europe and just, yeah, my eyes were just, yeah, I couldn't fathom how good those guys were and what a different world it was as well.
Hmm. Hmm. So you win that final stage. Obviously, there's a lot of eyeballs on you. Where does that take you? And I guess how does it work? Does a European team come and say, "Hey, Swain, we want you on the team in this position. We're gonna pay you a salary." Like, how does that all shake out?
Yeah, so that was the stagiaire opportunity with Mercury Viatel, which would be, if we were to compare it, it'd be like maybe like an EF education. So it'd be like
Okay, so
within 1 year going to like a world tour team. There was, at the time, Floyd Landis, Baden Cook, Gord Fraser, Hank Vogel. Like that's names from that era probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but at that era, those were big names, And here I am, some random guy just coming out of nowhere, got offered. So what happened is in that Tour de Beauce, Gord and Hank were both at that race, and they're kind of big guys on that team. And this is how it works on a lot of teams. It's like the management isn't in the races. They don't know everything that's going on. So they rely a lot on the feedback from the older experienced guys, like who's coming up, who
mm,
should we like, because they want to know who do we sign next, right? Who's out there. And so those guys had put in a good word, and that gave me an opportunity. Now, a stagiaire is like no pay. It's like you get an opportunity to go show what you can do in Europe. And like I said, it was not a good showing for me. I went there and I was stoked. You go to this big warehouse, and I think it was in France somewhere, some industrial zone, and they just start handing you duffel bags of clothing. Up to that point, I'd gotten like, you start the year, you get like 3 jerseys and a couple of pairs of shorts, and it's like, okay, make it last. And it's just everything, like four different sets of like rain shoe covers, and then aero booties, and then gloves, and like five different types of gloves. And I mean, you're just going through this stuff like, well, that was my payment just because I thought that was cool.
yeah.
But yeah, I struggled. Like I said, I'm going in races that are way over my head, and I think they thought I was going to be way better than I was. So there's that funny expectation where I think management is always hoping you're going to be some wonder kid.
Mm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
but the reality is, like, a lot of us need a couple of years, unless you're the super talents, the Wout Van Arts and the Pojacars and the Remcos. It's like you need time to figure out how it works. And like I said, I crashed a bunch, and in that Tour de l'Avenir, I crashed out of would have been like stage 4 or 5, and really buggered my back, and I got sent back home. It was kind of the end of my trip, anyways, and it was on. I flew back on a United flight on September 11th, and so I was in the air. That's a whole other story in itself, but it was a really strange time. Got grounded in Newfoundland for like 7 days or something like that. And when I what
You're part of that come from away musical.
yeah, yeah, it was just, yeah, what a crazy experience. And I remember getting home and just leaving my bike in the box and not touching it for like months.
Mm,
And there was some teams from the US kept writing me and calling me, and I was just not interested. I was just like, yeah, I was burnt out because I did too much in that first big year. But then I decided to give it another crack, and I went with the US team, and then, that just led to the whole rest of the story, right?
right. What were some of the biggest? I mean, it's so quick. Your second year, you're over in Europe. But what were some of the biggest, I guess, adjustments or eye openers to the whole program? I'm sure, things became pretty regimented pretty quickly.
Yeah, at that kind of, we'll just say world tour level, it was called Division One at that time.
Okay.
Just like the organization and the machine behind it. So, like if I was to compare what I'd gotten used to was like, well, first of all, my first year, my dad and I were driving around in a little pickup truck with a canopy and camping out in the bush, like trying to find camp spots near the start of the bike race, cooking out with camp stoves and swimming in the river to like wash up. So that was a far cry from what I ended up getting into in Europe, and just like team buses and hotels, and like you had all these different staff people. You had like a logistics person, like you had at a certain race there'd be like three or four soigneurs. There would be mechanics, a mechanics truck, and like you would have like four or five bikes just that they're always like tuning up and ready to go, like your spare bike, your TT bike, your two race bikes. It's just like, so you're just looking at it like, this is insane. It just, I went from like nothing to this whole like slipstream operation. And then, so if we go from there to like the actual racing, it was just, I was dealing with guys who'd been doing it from a young age, and they just knew every route. They knew everything about every race. You just saw in their physiology, they were just like, they were cyclists, and I was still, I mean, people might have mistaken me for a mechanic, like I did not look the role. I was still quite big and always, like unkempt and just not really. With those guys, it's like, if you take like a French cyclist, it's everything for them. They're just living and breathing in that world. And for me, I came from such a different world, and I didn't care about none of those races. I knew about. I didn't know about any of the riders. Like I was not. It's not that I didn't care or have respect. It's just that it wasn't my world. And it's not. And I was getting more involved. And then obviously, like 10 years, 15 years down the road, yeah, I know everything about those races and all that stuff. But what I didn't realize is like from the age of 6, they'd been going to the tour, watching Paris Roubaix, going to Flanders with their parents, going to all these monumental races and paying attention to the names, paying attention to the famous climbs and all of these things. And like even in my first like 5 years, I didn't care or know about any of it. So yeah, it's different, different coming from Canada, because it's not part of, like, it's not a mainstream sport. It's not something people are really interested in.
Right. No, for sure, for sure. It's funny, you know, the level. There's always levels to it, and someone is always, more steeped in the
Yeah.
tradition and huge respect for it. And but I guess if you've got the raw power and at the risk of glossing over probably some highlights in your career, how and I just looking online, I see all these time trial highlights from you, and how do they decide that they're like each team or the team that you're riding for, they're going to put their big effort behind you, or you're going to be a major guy? Like, are they just looking at, wow, this guy has brute power and can do this?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors in that. Within a given season, certain guys just peak better. Like, so it's like looking at history of training. Right now, there's just so much data. When I first came on, there was none of that. Like, but now there's just years and years of data on guys, and so they then. In those days they used to base a lot off of training camps, and then like the early season races where they're like running up to that, and then they would look at physiologic tests like in a lab, and they could really kind of calculate what a guy's capable of doing, and then they would kind of back. So like, yeah, huge engine, if you have huge VO2 max, or like ability to repeat efforts, that's a really big thing now, which wasn't so much
Right.
looked at in those days. They look at all that stuff, and then it's like the talk amongst the team. Like you do a training ride with a group of 10, 15 of the strongest guys in the team, and you're dropping everyone on the climbs. Well, it's just like, it's pretty clear who you're going to support in the next hilly race. So it's cycling still very much like that, even though we have all the data. It's like I said, going back to like Gordon and Hank Vogels, who got me my first chance at like racing in that high level. It's like, it's talk amongst the riders, right? It's still this dependence off of the reality, because one of the problems is we can Zwift and we can do all the tests, and some guys are just phenoms in a lab. Like, their numbers are insane, but put them in a race and they can't finish the race, right? So it's like this huge engine but no steering capacity, and
Right.
just because that's another thing I don't think people respect enough, is like, you watch a race like the Tour, and it just looks like a bunch of guys just riding along, right? You're kind of like, well, what's the point of this? Like, what are they doing? Why is no one winning? And you think the guys in the breakaway are the winners. Quite often it's just part of the deal, right? Those guys got away, and yeah, there's a chance they could win, but it's pretty slim. In that bunch, there's a lot of shit going on, and there's a lot of sketchy stuff, and there's a lot of risk taking. And for example, if we look at coming into an important climb, people don't understand, but the whole team of every team is geared towards getting that leader, that climber, the guy who can win the overall, the guy has the best chance in the front position. Because, like, for example, in France, you'll come from a highway and you'll turn onto like a goat path of a climb, right? In the Pyrenees, it's quite normal, and that's maybe like a 2 meter wide road, you know, and so it's a fight. It's like a sprint finish to get there. And you can imagine, if you have like 10 teams that are going for the general classification, it's an all out war. And so that means the other teammates and other riders, they're basically like I don't know if you know watts and all that kind of stuff, but the guys on the front, like that are doing the kind of lead out into the run in of that climb, they're riding it like five. It's like an arms race. You see the two
Yep.
teams. It just looks like they're riding along. Those guys on the front are like 550, 600 watts, doing like full on lead out pulls, right? And they're swapping off. You see the next guy, and you'll see them like blow, and then the next guy's
Yep.
coming through. That's like with 100K to go sometimes, right? And so it's just like there's so much going on. Um, so yeah, I don't know where I got on this, but like I think it's just to kind of help people understand um, all the different facets within a race, and all of the different jobs, right? You have a leader, but then you have a lot of guys there that are just there to back up. Like, if you look at like a UAE team for the Tour de France, everyone else is there to help Tadej. Like, that's it. There's no one going up the road trying to get their own result. It's like, if the team selected you for that role, that's it. You're not. There's no
Right.
glory for you. The glory is in doing your best job every day to have Pogacar win. That's it. It's really simple. And if you're not one of those guys, it gets quickly weeded out, right? Because that's the other thing. You live together on the road. It becomes really clear, people's intent and their character, right? Because you can't hide it when you're living with someone in a grand tour. It's quite often you're a month on the road, because you go there early, for the week before. So it's 20, 25, 26, 27 days, and you live together. Not to mention, you probably just did an altitude camp prior to that, right? So yeah, it becomes really apparent, and so those teams are to make a Tour de France team. It's huge. It's really big. It's a really big deal. Yeah.
So I guess fast forward to that, how does that come about? And you know, I guess to ask a somewhat of a sensitive question, like, are you now making a living that you expected racing bikes, or greater than you could have ever expected? Is the whole thing just like, pinch me, I'm racing in the Tour de France?
Yeah. So I had a funny period in. So I quit in 2004. I was not super stoked with racing anymore, and everything I'd heard about Europe was doping this, doping that, and all of the stuff.
Right.
And I was just like, what am I doing in this crazy sport? Like, but then in that time, I realized, okay, I'm not going to come back later. I have to do this now. Like, I realized it was still a big part of who I am. And so
Hmm.
I kept, I was lucky enough. I came back with the Canadian team, Symmetrics, and it was awesome. Like, I spent a bunch of great years there. I developed a lot as a person in a kind of leadership role. And that really helped me love the sport again, because it was brought down to just simplicity and racing with a bunch of like really, I to this day really good friends. And when 2008 rolled around, there was kind of like an economic downfall there, and our sponsors for that team basically said, yeah, like, you guys can finish up the year, but we can't pay you anymore, but we have enough
Hmm.
money to like get you to all the races for the rest of the year. And everyone on that team opted to keep racing, which I thought, that's a
Hmm.
special thing. Like, a lot of guys could have been pretty mad. And I had one of my best years there. I was second in the world championships. I went to the Olympics that year. Um, yeah, a bunch of really like big kind of results for me. And then I had Europe team, like Garmin, basically offered me a contract, and I wasn't like a lot of guys would have just been jumping on that, and I was just like, I don't know. I wasn't like I wasn't sold on Europe. But then I
Was it because of the commitment, or that stigma of, hey, everyone's doping here, I don't know what the heck I'm gonna do? What was that
a
hesitation?
little bit of everything. I'd raced in Europe here and there, so I knew the level. I knew how crazy it was. I did see, one of the big factors for me was in 2008 they came out with the bio passport, which is really important test to kind of see all of the different, basically to track someone's like hematology to see if like there's massive shifting throughout a season.
Hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
not something that can like pinpoint anything exact, but it can really kind of paint a picture of what's happening in this person's life, because as a human you don't shift that much. And in those early years guys were shifting a lot, like in the hematocrit and the hemoglobin department. And so that was kind of like something that I was like, okay, things are changing, because I also saw like in the world championships that year, like I got a result, and also I was just getting better as a rider. And also the hard part for me was that I loved my life that I was living. Like, I had that freedom I was talking about. I wasn't really making any money, but I didn't care, because I was doing all the stuff I wanted to do. So those were the things going through my mind. But then I just thought, like, well, it's a 2-year deal. The worst case scenario is I spend 2 years in Spain, travel around a bunch, and see what Europe's all about. And that's how I kind of eventually decided to go that route. Um, so up to that point, going back to your initial question, up to that point, I'd done more than anything I ever thought I could do in cycling. Right? I'd gone to the Olympics. I'd won the UCI Americas Tour, which is like a year long thing, like of all like the races in South America, North America, just like a points thing. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I'd just done like national championships, all these things that you know that were important to me at that time, and I was just like, well, I can't do any better than that. So like, let's just experience, see where this goes, right? And then before you know it, like once you kind of make it through those first years in Europe and you start getting the hang of it, it's like you're starting all over again. And then that becomes the new challenge. Oh, what can I do here? And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're immersed, and then you're like trying to get on the Tour de France team. You know, you've done the Giro, you've done the Vuelta, you've done all the big monuments, and it's like, okay, Tour de France, like, because it's, I will. This is a joke I have with a lot of my friends who race professionally. It's like I know, like some of the best riders I know, they're just their abilities aren't for the Tour de France, and meanwhile they've won big races, like big important races, like in the world of professional cycling, huge races. But when they're asked, when they're back home, like, have you done the Tour de France? It's like, if you
Right.
say no, it's like, well, then what do you do for work? It's like, it's
Yeah.
like you're just not a cyclist if you haven't done the Tour de France. And so that's always been funny to me, because it's just a lack of understanding in North American culture. Whereas if, a Belgian or a French person was talking to a professional cyclist that had never done the Tour de France, it wouldn't be a thing. They would know the whole history of that person. So, anyways, yeah, ended up doing the Tour de France. I think is one of the oldest rookies to do the Tour de France.
Mm.
And I should have stopped after my first year of doing it, because it was my best year, the best experience I had at the Tour. We won a couple we won 3 stages, and we had the yellow jersey for a bunch of days. So it was like, riding on the front, and I was brought specifically for the team time trial, which we won in Nice. We still have the fastest ever recorded time of a Tour de France stage. That was in
Wow.
2013. So that's kind of cool when you think of how much the technology has gotten better, and all that stuff. Yeah, a bunch of guys from Aussie, and yeah, it was, yeah, really really cool experience. So after that, it was, we had some bad luck, and you know it's just how grand tours can be. You lose some of the key reasons you're there, and it becomes a long 21 days. um,
Mm.
so anyways, yeah, I always joke, like, my first one, I should have just stopped after that, and just, I always loved the Giro, the Grand Tour in Italy. It's 21 days as well. For me, that's the most beautiful race. I did a lot of those. I think I did 7 of those ones, and the Vuelta was also a great one too.
Wow. Wow. The you guys won the team time trial? Did you win a solo time trial as well?
No, I never did. I was really shooting for that stage 11, I believe it was, in that tour, because I was still going really good, but I was at the end of my rope, because I'd done the Giro before. So I'd
Mm.
done the Northern Classics, Tour of Romandy, the Giro, Tour of Slovenia, and then into the Tour de France. So it's like, that doesn't happen nowadays. They would,
Right.
like, the UCI just wouldn't allow that, that many race days in that period. So I was really going for it, but yeah, I think I ran fourth
Okay.
in that TT. It was a long TT, windy. Um, I gave it everything. That was what I had for the day. So that was my one real crack at a Tour de France individual stage. But I was, how I got selected for that team was because of the team time trial, and that was like my big. For me, that's like a very
Right.
proud moment, because I know I had one of those days. It's rare. I always joke, like, you quite often have those days when you're out training, and you're just like, I wish I could apply this to somewhere where it matters right now, because it's being totally wasted on on this training day. Yeah.
Right. Right. That myself getting, only brushing the surface, but looking more and more at cycling, and it's helped me look at race car stuff from a slightly, call it orthogonal or different angle as far as the aero stuff goes. How much time during that period were you guys spending in the wind tunnel, or was that data brought back to you, and then maybe you weren't in the wind tunnel, but they were adjusting your jersey and your positioning and stuff like that? Like, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, so that was kind of the precursor to what we're seeing now in cycling. That was around the time where a lot of that stuff was being dabbled with, but it wasn't like, I think of the information guys now and I look at the TT setups they have now, like it's a big difference. Like, so right at
Mm.
that point, they were starting to learn a lot, like, for example, just helmet shape. Like back in the day, I think they used to just think like, well, like a teardrop, that looks pretty sharp, and that's like the arrow thing. If I don't know if you've seen a lot of the helmets now, it's like very much the opposite.
Yeah.
It's like kind of like a mushroom head, and
Yep.
to just close off all of these pockets, right? That are causing turbulence, and so as there's more knowledge about all that stuff, and I think probably a lot of it has been learned from the race car world, right? Where they spend a lot of a lot more money, right?
A lot of money.
That was always the biggest fear with cycling teams. The budgets aren't that big, and to send a bunch of guys to wind tunnels, and one of the issues is like, for one guy and his body type, yeah, that position in that helmet and that skin suit slash whatever combo might be great, and for another guy with a different physiology, it's actually really bad. And what they
Mm.
used to do is, because they would just go and test one of the phenoms, the guys worth investing in, because you can only pick a few, the golden child. Well, they would take that knowledge gained and just apply it to everyone else. But it wasn't like, for some guys, it was not good. If you think of the different aero positions you've probably seen in the front, like the front end is everything, right? The
Right.
How clean the front end is, and then you've probably seen some guys that are up really high, narrow,
Hmm.
that's faster, and other guys need to be super low and closed in and then crouched up. It's like there's just a million ways to go about it, and that's why that wind tunnel stuff is so important. And at that time, it was just kind of being applied to the masses. But we were very lucky. We had a guy named Lars Teutenberg, a German guy, who's just, yeah, he is like a guru when it comes to that. And what I loved is he was able to. We would go to the track. We'd go to the velodrome. So like a velodrome with a ceiling, so no like problems with wind and different
Right.
weather variables. And we would do our testing on the track, and he would, because he had such a good eye, because he'd just done a million wind tunnel tests, and he knew he just has this like data bank and algorithm in his head, right? So he's able to look at you and just be like, oh, that's crap, you gotta do this, and he would make these adjustments, and then you could go and ride at 50K an hour, and we were able to take those power files and go
Mm.
like and see the actual change, right? And those were actually big days on the track, because you're like doing a lot of time at just riding at 50K an hour. um and so my point there was, is I with Garmin, I went to the wind tunnel in 2009, and I'd just been second in the world championships in the time trial the year before, and they're looking at my position and they're just like, man, you can make so much improvements. The position I had was just like what I'd always ridden, like my own. It was just my own thing. I had no, like, based off of nothing, just get it as low as possible. Is it still
Yeah.
comfortable? Can I still push watts? Okay, we're good. That was the theory at the time. And what was crazy is they get me in the wind tunnel and everyone's just tweaking everything, right? And they're just high fiving each other, like, man, we just saved you like 50 watts. You're gonna be like world champion easy, like all this stuff. And I'm buying into it. I'm like, this is awesome. Yeah. One of the things on the wind tunnel is you're pedaling with no friction, right? So it's just like,
Right.
yeah, this feels all right. And then so it's quite funny. I get that bike out of the jig, and it was like at a training camp. I get it back and I go out to do some efforts on it, and I'm like, riding at like 350 watts, and I can't breathe. My hips are pinched right off. There's like no blood going to my legs. I'm in this super contorted position. I'm like, hey, it's great that we're so aero, but I can't pedal in this thing. So yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff like that early on, where it was just like trial and error, and you just had to, yeah, figure it out. And now there's just so much more information, data, and better equipment. And I look at the cockpits of these guys, these kind of 3D printed,
Mm.
sweet, like everything's just clean. Like back in the day, it was wires and crap and bolts, and because the technology and the interest just wasn't there. Like we had some old school mechanics who would just look at you like, piss off with your, because they're
Right.
like, okay, go and win every TT, and then we'll start working on your TT bike. So yeah,
Yep.
there's a bit of a
Yep.
conflict there because you do have to back it up, but it is a bit of an arms race, right? Like, I will say, even in those days, the team that you rode for and the bike sponsor that they had, it mattered massively. It was all the difference in the world. If you were on, like, in those days, I'll just say like a BMC or a Specialized, they put R&D or Scott. I was lucky; I was on a Scott for a big part of my career, and they put R&D into their TT bikes. Whereas a lot of companies, they just like go through the Taiwan catalog and be like, "Oh, that one looks cool. Yeah, we'll order those." And it's like, because it looks aero, or like
Yeah.
there's no, like, yeah, there's no testing, there's no anything. So yeah, I was lucky to be on a team that actually cared about that kind of stuff, because that made a big difference in that era. It's come so far because every team, you cannot afford not to care about it now, right? And every bike manufacturer, I would say 99% of them make really good stuff. Like their high end road bike or their high end TT bike, it's all at such a high level now. You just can't afford not to. You just won't, because people are switched on now, right? That's the other thing with the internet.
Right.
Everyone knows stuff, and they'll go and do their research, like wind tunnel. Like, does it really matter for a guy who's 56 years old and carrying 20 extra pounds? Probably not. But it's like, if you're going to spend that much money, you might as well get the best one, right? So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. No, it's true. That's so funny you say that mentality between the rider and the mechanic.
Yeah.
I've come across that for sure.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'm not gonna go slower if the car's faster. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, they're just
absolutely.
seeing work for
So,
themselves, and they're just like,
t-
man, like, show me what you can do. If you're the best guy, then we'll do some extra work, I guess. Yeah.
right, and everything seems so marginal,
Yeah. Yeah. To them, for sure.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and stop me if I'm glossing over anything. Your first Tour de France, by today's standards, you're pretty old. And
Very old.
how do you start to conceptualize the end of your professional road racing career and thinking about the future, and how does it come about?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was, like I said, I started late, so I had a lifespan in me. I started when I was 24, 25. And yeah, around the age of, so when I was 40, I had our first son. And I
Hmm.
always said, like, as soon as we have kids, like, I can't do it anymore, because it's just like, I want to be a dad. I want to be around for my kids. And so I was still racing. And what was hard for me was I was still, in that Giro in 2018. We almost won the whole thing with Simon Yates. So from stage 4, we had the pink jersey. Our team had become more of a Grand Tour racing team with Simon Yates and Esteban Chavez, and these young guys that were coming up that were just hitters, like guys who could win Grand Tours, which is an anomaly in itself, right? And so you have to back that. So basically, you change everything about how you ride as a ride. Like, you change a lot about your physiology and all those things. And I was really enjoying that process, working with those guys. And I personally had one of my best Grand Tours as a rider, just physiology wise. And I was 40. Yeah, it's like 41. And but I was retiring that year, and it
Hmm.
was like a weird thing, because, like, numbers wise, I'm still okay. Top end, I don't have the top end that I had when I was 30 or 28 or
Sure.
whatever. But if I looked at, like, durability and repeatability, and, like, being able to go, like, all day, like, that was better than it ever had been.
Hmm.
And yeah, like, Chris Froome ended up, like, going on a rampage on one of the final last mountain stages and just stormed away with the race on like some crazy move. But like up to that point, we were like, oh yeah, we're winning the Giro, you know. So it's
Mm,
part of that, and I was retiring that year, and it was a tough decision at that point because I was like, man, I'm still feel good. So it wasn't a physical thing. It was just that we decided that you have to pick some point, and you can't. I'm not going to be one of these guys like trying to bang on when I'm like 45, trying to be like with 21-year-olds. Like it's just at that level, it's not. I'm sure you could do it. Like the team would have had me. Um, was it healthy? Was it the right thing to
mm,
do? No, I don't think so. And yeah, you have to make the call at some point. But then the crazy thing is, I had an American team, a friend who ran an American team was now going to Europe, and they kind of duped me into another year as the old guy to kind of
yeah.
help the young guys. And I couldn't turn it down because it was a good opportunity in many ways. But it was a hard year, because I really tried to rally around being my best. Because one of the things to help guys is you have to be there at the final of the race. So that means like you
Right.
still have to be fucking good. And so I was trying to do all that stuff, and it was just hard because it was a smaller organ. I'd gotten used to a very good organized level, and nothing against that final team. It's just that it's like it's a learning curve for everyone,
Mm,
and you find yourself kind of back in this kind of disorganized and kind of janky setup, and you're just like, what am I doing? So it was great, and it was rough in many ways. um, but yeah, retiring is a weird thing. That's just a whole other topic because
right.
it's yeah, you you've had this one simple objective for the last 20 plus years, and now it's kind of like, oh, I'm supposed to figure out this next phase, I guess. Like, what am I going to do now? And I will say another strange thing about like sport, and I don't know how it is in your sport, but you work super hard to get to a level, and then it's kind of like when you're done, meaning you age out, or some guys just don't even get to make the choice.
Right.
It's see you later, and you know you you've worked super hard to get to this level, and it's just like figure it out. Like yeah, it's wild, and it's all stuff I kind of suspected and imagined would be the case, but it's like when it really happens, you're like, oh, okay, wow, this is yeah, next level.
Right. Before I leave the professional stuff, I ask, and I stole this question from Dale Earnhardt Jr. He asks a lot of guys on his podcast, and he calls it, very politically correctly, he calls it innovation. So he says, what's your best innovation story? What was the best, innovation you saw on the tour? And to put it bluntly, it could be outright cheating, but what are some trick things that maybe were in the gray area or bending the rule book that you saw or heard about and were like, oh man, I can't believe they're doing that.
Ooh, cycling is kind of like captain of the gray areas, because it's just like they shut one thing down and it just leads to another. And like that's why I still love sport. That's why I still like am heavily involved in cycling because I love that aspect of because I think it's all you know I look at the way guys are training and the so if I'm going to say the innovation that has changed everything, if I'm going to talk about what changed from like when I retired, I started seeing it until now. We're seeing like insane human performances. We're looking at these guys like Pogacar and Vingegaard and Wout van Aert. Like these guys are just. I always say when I came over to Europe, a sprinter was a sprinter. Couldn't get over a climb to
Mm,
save his life, but he could rip everyone up in the final. Climber was 120 pounds, couldn't time trial, couldn't sprint to save his life. Um, then there was like time trialers, roll airs, kind of guys who did the work. They could do good stuff they could get over climbs. They could maybe win like a 1 week long tour. You know, it's kind of like it was really specific. And then kind of going back to that, like guys thinking outside of what's possible.
Mm.
Well, Van Aert, the guy can win a bunch sprint of 180 guys. He can win a prologue, like a short time trial. He can win a long time trial. He can win a mountain stage of the Tour de France. He can win cyclocross races. Uh, for me, that's just like, I just shake my head. And then I look at a Pogacar and
Mm.
I'm like, I'm looking at the speeds he's doing these climbs at, and I'm just shaking my head. So what's changed? Okay, well, everyone wants to point to whatever doping and all that kind of stuff. And look, I'm not a dummy. I think we find out about all this stuff 10 years, 15 years. I hope not for these guys' case. I hope they're not doing something that's dangerous for them. But cycling, sorry, but like history just doesn't change that quickly, and people's mentality and what they're after, it's just like it just changes. Like they do different stuff, and whether it's
Mm-hmm.
gray area and working a lot, or whether it's placebo. Now, I'm a big believer in placebo. Like if you
Mm.
are out there and you believe you have the latest, greatest. I used to make a joke about sports science. It's like, because I work closely with those guys. I'm fascinated. I love what they do because I find it very interesting. But my joke was like, you guys, all you do every year is try and create the next greatest special thing that everyone buys into. That's all you have to do. It doesn't have to work. It's just you create the culture within the team, like Sky. If you remember Sky, they had all these wacky protocols, and all those guys were just like, yeah, we're just you guys wouldn't even understand what we're doing at these training camps. Like it's just so specific, special, and we got the latest this and that. Man, there's power in that belief, and I've
Oh
seen
yeah.
it in myself. Placebo, like it's crazy how powerful that stuff is. And so I guess getting back to my point, I think what has changed a lot is this generation that has come up have been raised with the internet, and all of the knowledge of the world is out there. You can
Mm.
find, so what we used to find out in little tidbits years later from Sky, and scrambling around as a team, like, oh, they're using dimples in their skin suits. Oh, that's what we need to do. Then we go and talk to the clothes sponsor, and that would come like a year later. It's already too late. They've been kicking our asses for the last whatever,
Yeah.
like, all this stuff. And so I think of these young guys being raised with all that information and knowledge, right? And then already understanding the importance of all these, like, this minutia. So then you mix that in with a super freak like Tadej, and you have this end product, this guy who's able to do amazing things. But then on top of that, the other big innovation has been the nutrition. So these kind of super
Mm.
dense carbohydrates. So in my time, everyone was afraid to gain weight. Everyone was worried about being fat. And so then there was this weird cycle of like starvation slash eating too much, starvation slash eating too much, not eating enough on the bike, starving, coming back, smashing too much food, just this
Mm.
mismatch of nutrition. And I think we really hurt ourselves a lot in that time when I watch how people hydrate and eat now on a bike and then off the bike. We were like always in this kind of diet mode. Not me particularly. I was always a bit bigger. I was not afraid to eat because I was like, well, I still want to have power. Like I'm not going to climb with those guys. So I got to have the thing that
Right.
still works for me. I'm not going to take that away from myself. But I did see it in so many guys where they would just like they would have these little windows of like performance, because you can starve yourself, get light, and still have this kind of shadow left of yourself to get that performance. But then you fall apart, and it takes a month
Mm.
to almost like build back up again. But now I just see guys smashing like 90, 100 grams of carbs an hour, and it's in these forms of carbohydrates that are actually digestible and not rotting your guts out, or like battery acid in some of these old gels that we used to have back in the day that only had like 20 grams of carbs, and still made your guts feel like hell. So yeah, those like cluster dextrins and all that crazy technology they're coming up with, where you're able to drink 400 or 500 calories in a bottle. That's huge, especially in a stressful classic style race. I remember it would be going so hard on cobbles and shit roads and bad weather and stress and crashes. you weren't pulling a bar out and eating anything. Like you were hands
Right.
on the handlebars, man, like head down. And so to be able to grab a bottle and get hydration and nutrition, it's like game changer. And so,
Mm,
aside from, I'm sure there's a lot of other wacky protocols, and I've seen lots of different stuff, but I personally believe those are the big two things. If I was to say that have changed the game since I've been doing it.
right. Right. No, that I never thought about that nutrition stuff. I just always took it for granted that they were always on top of that. I mean, maybe short of, call it the 60s, 70s and 80s, but I didn't realize that that even since the 2010s it's come that far.
Oh yeah, like that was one of the biggest things I was always pushing when I was on a team called Green Edge, which is an Australian team, really good progressive team. But like I think back to those early years, you'd be at a Tour de France, you'd be at some. I mean, that's the funny thing about the tour. You could be at like a chateau, which would be just insane, like so nice, like yeah, big courtyards and fancy and all that, and that's where everyone thinks you stay. But then if you're familiar, like there's like these little kind of camping hotels called the Campanile, and
Yeah.
they're just like tiny little like, and you go and eat at the restaurants like boiled pasta and boiled chicken breast, and you're like sitting there going like, this is what we're gonna eat, for like 210K in the mountains tomorrow. Like, what the hell is this stuff? So that's the other one is like all teams have chefs now. Like if you're at a big race, you have a chef with a chef's vehicle, and the food is friggin' good. Like it's designed for what there's nutritionists kicking around, and they're looking at your power files and all that kind of stuff. So you come into the bus, and basically you know exactly what you need to eat. There's no question. And I remember that, like, I'd come in starving, like at the Giro, you'd be out in the pissing cold all day, and you're just starving, and then you'd eat too much. And then
Right.
like that's what you want to do. Your lizard brain is telling you that's what you need, but you actually only need this much. It's actually better for your digestion and recovery to have this much. So that's like there's so much to do with nutrition, and it's cool to see that they're getting that all dialed. It's maybe a bit too much because now guys are like weighing their food and like being kind of obsessed about it. I don't know if I
Right.
could have handled that.
Right. So after, call it retirement, what's the plan? Are you still living in Europe? I know you eventually, you're in BC now, but kind of take me through that if there is a plan and what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
Good question. Yeah, no, like our so originally, I'll try and keep it short, but like we were going to stay in Andorra. I lived in Andorra between Spain and France, and starting a business there. And then it was a business that was going to be dependent off of international travel, and
Okay.
that was right when COVID hit. So it's like, wow, yeah, that's probably not a good
Oh,
good call. Could be a couple of years before that gets back. So we kind of
right.
had to sell everything and move back to Canada because that was also part of the plan eventually is get back to family and I had a second child on the way. So we just want to be grounded during that weird time and so yeah, we moved back. We're in the Kootenays in near Nelson, British Columbia, and the big emphasis has just been to like raise the kids, like give them a life like while they're this age. They just change so fast, and so the big goal is to really be around and do as much with them. So I'm I do some coaching. I do like lots of I really try and do a lot of different things because I think I have from a lifetime of doing that sport. I worked a lot before I became a bike racer. I know what it is. I like hard work and all that stuff, but it changes you as far as like um, yeah, do I want to do that? Like it's so time is my commodity now. So I try and do things that
Right.
allow me time. And so yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. And there's always the possibility to go back to Europe. Like I still talk with some teams about um, going and working in the high performance side of
Mm,
things because I still love it. I still like yeah, I'm always studying and still working with some guys that are in that world and yeah, it's something that I still love and very passionate about. So Yeah, right now we're in this funny phase because yeah, I'm trying to figure out those next steps, but at the same time, very content with our life right now.
Mm,
So it's not like I don't have a fire under my ass, let's say, and maybe that will come. But I'm also a believer in like you keep dabbling in certain things and trying and kind of showing up, and eventually it kind of unfolds, you know. And I'm not saying it just magically happens, but you have to put in the work and you have to like keep the intention there. But I also don't like to force those things, if that makes sense.
for sure, for sure. I guess tell me about the you're running camps right now,
Yeah,
and that's just kind of
yeah,
to stay busy, make a little bit of money. Like, tell me about it.
yeah. So on our property we have a big cabin, and I've modified an apartment as well. That's addition to that. So people can come and stay and do some training with me. And then my friend Ryan Anderson and I, we do some training camps with different groups throughout, like in the Okanagan, and I work with this ski lodge up north of us here called White Grizzly. We do
Okay.
some gravel camps, and I have like August and September actually getting quite busy for me again. So like July has been a good period to just kind of chill out. But yeah, that's kind of the thing, and the more I get involved, the more people I meet. Outside of the kind of like high performance racing world, and more interested in like the fun slash events kind of world. And you know, you
Right.
realize like a lot of people, they want to do, you know, they they love it for fun, but also they want to go fast and they want to feel good. And that's always my question is like, well, it's a different world if you want to go fast, you know. Like it's, if you just want to have fun, that's easy, you know.
Yeah.
Just ride slow and stop lots, you know. But when you want to go fast, it's a different world. And so that's where, you know, that's where I try and help people that are kind of getting interested in that world. And I just use, you know, like just years of experience of like a lot of hard lessons too, you know, like so that's actually the most fun I have, is working with people that I can make a big progression in. Working with
For sure.
the
Yeah.
highest end athletes, they're already so good. If you can make like 0.5% gain in a year, that's pretty big, because they're already just so
Right.
good. But like when you're starting with someone who's
Right.
like clean slate, it's just like wow, like turbo.
Yeah, totally. You could probably just, look at someone walking up your driveway and fix 10 things and
Absolutely.
doing a bunch of
Yeah,
things that are stupid. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Huh. That's great. That's great. So I guess, um, going back to the beginning, how I first, saw your name on this leaderboard of these two races you did this year. Tell me about, I guess, the impetus to do these big, long races, kind of what the goal is, and I guess how it all went.
yeah. Good question, because I never, you know, I was the ultra like longer races. I always knew I would love them, um, but I've always been afraid of them just because of the sleep deprivation, and then I know what it takes to prepare for them and be
Mm,
good. And I'm always afraid of like those bit of demons that I have that like I know take me away from family and everything else. Like I have a switch, and so I've always been a bit leery of that. But over this, you know, bunch of years of like having stopped, I've changed as a person. I've like worked. I mean, as an athlete, you're just a selfish, just me,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And as a
100%.
dad, you can't live like that. So I've been able to change and adapt and grow a lot as a person. And I think kind of come back at it with a healthier perspective as far as how I approach things before. Because when I was before, I was in a very extreme world, and my job and my kind of livelihood depended off of those things. So it's hard to kind of change that mold, right? Where, you know, it's a very habitual thing for me. And so when I came back, I was like, well, you know, for one, the buckshot was just like on a whim. It was like I'd been ski touring a ton this winter. I had a really good like late part of the season. I was doing like big tours, and I felt good. And I was happy to get on the bike and kind
Mm,
of start pushing it again. So then, like, I'd heard of this buckshot, and I was talking with a friend who was doing it, and he wanted like a bunch of advice, and I was just giving him a bunch of advice, and I was like, wait a sec.
I guess quickly just explain what that race is.
It's like it's a ride out of Kamloops. It's 400. It was 430K with I think close to 10,000 meters of climbing. Bit of single track, like just everything, like road, gravel, single track, mud, gnarly weather. Yeah, it was yeah, really cool. And so my brother lives in Kamloops, so I was like, oh, family trip. Like my kids love to go to my brother's place, and I was just like, oh, that'll all work out perfect, you know. And my wife's kind of like she's so supportive of, like, you know, because that's like we live that life together, so she knows I'm just nuts about this stuff, and it's just going to be a part of who I am.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't know what it was going to be like. I That was going to be the first time dabbling with something like that. So, but I also come from a different approach. Like I know, like I still do testing. I still do like metabolic cart, and I know like all my zones and numbers and fat max crossover, all that stuff. So it's like it's very scientific for me. It's like, well, I can ride like this for this many hours. If everything
Mm,
goes well, if I prepare properly, like technology wise and equipment wise and all that stuff, this is what I can do. So then I go there and I don't really worry about anything else. I just know like, oh, this is how I'll ride for the day. And so
huh.
I went out and I had just a blast. Like, yeah, it was pretty crap weather at times for sure. There was kind of moments where you're like, oh, this is kind of, you know, I'm sure you heard some stories if you talk to
Yeah. Yeah.
Steph about it. But
Yeah.
there's like a pass there that it's snowing. It's like the road is like caking up with proper snow, and you're just kind of like, wow, we're keeping on climbing here. Yeah, and it's pretty cool. I'm pretty wet, and it's like it's late into the, you know, you probably around hour 14 or 15 at this point, you know, and yeah, you're just kind of going like you're really out there. And anyways, yeah, there's just moments, and I think that's what I love about these races is that you really can get close to like those feelings of like, yeah, real challenge, you know. But I
Mm,
will say, like, probably the most euphoric moment, and this is kind of just a nostalgia thing, is the final part of that course came along the north side of the river that runs into I guess it's the Thompson that's running out of there. But there was in 2004, that's where I won my first time trial national championships on that same road. And so I was coming back, and you know it's pitch black, and I'm remembering the different turns and undulations of this road, and I'm just like, this is so cool. Like, I don't know. So that's exactly 20 years later. You know, I'm doing
wow.
some wacky bike event, but yeah. That so then I was just kind of like, that was so fun. That was so good, and I got so much out of it, so much satisfaction out of it, and the epic was not on my mind at all. I was actually coaching a guy who was doing it, and I was
Mm,
like kind of helping him. We were talking about all the different sections and how to approach all this stuff, and you know, like I can get quite into that stuff, and like just how to
right.
approach
Yeah.
like the nutrition and the hydration side and the equipment side. It's like a big, for me, it's like, why would, if you're taking on something that hard, why would you half-ass it or not think about those things? Why wouldn't you think about every detail? Like, it's just too hard. Like, why would you give
Yeah.
away that stuff, right? And I'm sure you can relate, like in the car racing world, it's like, well, why wouldn't you just have the best stuff? Like, it's,
Yeah.
you're crazy not to.
You just can't give it away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then as like I was, you know, talking to him, you know, and my coaching style is very much like it's a day-to-day thing. Like because I feel like training has to be adaptable to your life, and then
Mm,
you also have to be learning. Otherwise, like I can send you a program, and that's just, it's not interesting to me. You're not like, what are we doing? Check in once a
yeah.
month and talk about how the month went? Like, that's insane. So anyways, we're like, and then I was like, find myself getting into it. I'm like, the other thing is the part of the course goes right through my backyard. Here in
Oh,
Nelson, like we live right on the Great Northern Rail Trail,
Right.
So that goes right through the backyard. And I was just like, yeah, gotta do it, you know? And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, probably I would say a month out, I decided, yeah, gonna do it. And then
Okay.
just started doing all the wacky preparation, which is like kind of overwhelming.
Well, and explain again what that race was.
Yeah, so that's 1,040K from Merritt to Fernie, and it's travels across a lot of the old Kettle Valley rail trail, and it's a grind. Yeah, it's a proper grind. It's I always say like it's one of those courses where you'll do like a climb for like an hour and a half, but the descent is not like a proper descent where you're just like coasting and recovering. It's like 3%. So you're still pedaling. And if you want to go fast, you're
Right.
still like you can make up some time pedaling. So it's proper grind. Like you're just pedal to the metal that whole entire ride. And then what's crazy about it is I would say in the last 300K, it gets real tough. Like that's actually some of the hardest bits. And that's usually when your body's the most tapped out and physically hurting. And you hit like some really rough sections. So yeah, it's a special one. And yeah, again, I loved like when you finish, you're so buggered. Like you're just so buggered that you're just like never again. But then it's yeah, I have such good memories of it now. Like such yeah, I was stoked I did it, and man, it's hard, but it's like yeah, you got to have cool challenges in life, you know.
Absolutely. Did you know, and I think I know the answer now, understanding how incredibly analytical you are, that was your race plan, was to ride basically the whole thing straight?
It was my plan. How much I knew I could do it, that's the part I didn't know. So, talking with friends who do, like, I have a friend, Rob Britton, who does this stuff professionally. And
Okay.
I talked with him about asking a few questions. I don't want to, like, because I'm also respectful of his trade, like, it's like those are
Totally. Yeah, yeah.
hard earned lessons for him. But I was just like, what do you do for sleep, man? Like, and he just told me straight up, and everything he said was spot on. One of the things is like you can go first day, and then it's about like 35, 36th hour. You start to go a little funny, things start to go a little
Mm,
wonky. And man, for me, they certainly did. Hey, like I remember I'd stopped in Cranbrook, so I hadn't slept. I did 10 minutes on the ferry. When I
okay.
crossed there's a ferry from Balfour to Crawford Bay, really short ferry. So it was like 10 minutes. It was not the best. And I'd gotten into Cranbrook about like 3 in the morning or something. And I did like a little stock up at the gas station. And immediately I was freezing cold. It wasn't cold, but it was just like your circadian
Mm,
rhythms out, your energies are low. I mean, you've burned so much energy up to this point. I'm like, oh man, this is not good, eh? And I start heading down towards this. So it's like a nice path that goes along the highway, and then you pop into this single track that's actually it's dark, so it is kind of technical. It's a really nice trail, but it's like in the dark in my state, it's technical. And while I'm going on this path along the highway, everything is moving. So like so like every tree, every stump, they're all moving. They're all just like dancing and doing like. And at first you're kind of ignoring it, like you're like, huh. But like what I kept finding I would do would be like, oh, that's a bear up there, I'm pretty sure. And then you get up close to it, and it's so far from a bear. You're just like,
mm.
so you're basically your brain is just playing all kinds of wacky tricks on you. And I was like, okay, this is a good moment. You got to stop, pull over, chuck the. I had like a little piece of Reflectix insulation, small little kind of bivy bag, crawl in there, helmet on, everything's still on, set the alarm for an hour. Dude, hour just went like boom. Like it was like a second. And the alarm's going off, and I'm just like, no, no, like just so like I can't believe I'm being like if I had a choice, I would have stayed there like for another 12 hours just sleeping away. Like it
Yeah.
would, that crappy little plastic like bivy bag was heaven at that point. Get up, eat some more Ruffles chips or whatever the hell I had left in my thing, and then just continue. But like that hour reset was enough. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So that was your total sleep.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Did you get the movement within nature again near the end of the race?
No, so I had a weird thing happen, and it was quite painful. The last hole, like I would have loved to have like get a good flow state there going towards the end of that race, but I so before the epic, I was at my brother's place and I was testing out the rig, and I went way down this single track thing that I like ended up I couldn't get through this gate. All these weird things happened. I had to hike back up the super steep trail. I do a lot of hiking with my bike. It's not an issue, but I tweaked something in my calf that
Mm,
normally would have been fine. It would have recovered because I like, but then I started the epic. Well, in this time of doing the epic, it just flared up. So by the time I hit
right.
that ferry, this calf of mine had like doubled up in size almost. Looking down, this is like, and it hurts. It hurts so bad that the vibration from like, and everything
Mm,
from that point on is just rough. So I did like the descent off of Grey Creek Pass unclipped on that side with my thigh kind of resting on the seat. So it's a dodgy descent. And I'm going down there like one leg, just like bashing, like leaning off to the side. Like it was the worst. And then like all of those rough roads after that, like it was bad because you just kept having to unclip. And so it was really painful coming into Fernie. And I was kind of worried about that. Like is this going to be like?
mm.
And it's crazy. Like you get a couple days rest and everything goes back to normal. I had to do like a gravel training camp like the next Friday, so it was a
Oh
bit
my
bit of a
goodness.
rough turnaround. Um, but yeah, got through and yeah, it was all good.
Man. So do you have do you have desires or plans to do more of these things?
It's weird because like I would say now, no, like I'm not really looking at anything, but I know it'll come back again. I
Mm,
keep looking at the divide and some of these other ones like, but there's a lot of cool stuff around the world. It just matters like how much you can fit it into your kind of normal life schedule because I love it. I'm gonna be totally honest, like I think it's the one thing in cycling I was better designed for. um
mm.
yeah, I really love it. So it's it's just a matter of like I also have to think like I'm 47. I know there's a certain aspect to it, it's not healthy, so it's about mitigating that, like really being careful as far as like respecting those efforts, kind of
Mm.
spacing them out. um, yeah, I think exercise is healthy. I think exercise to that point is very unhealthy, you know.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah, when you're seeing stuff in the
yeah,
forest.
yeah.
Oh man, Swain, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's a pleasure to get to know your story here. Um, I I ask all my guys a little piece of advice, and I don't know if I got a couple questions. Maybe one is probably more generic for a piece of advice for guys who have this burning desire like you did to go out and do certain things. Whether it was climbing or just riding your bike, and you know you were able to make a life around that. What kind of advice would you give to maybe someone who's young who just has this passion to do something?
Yeah, great question. And it's something I talk to a lot about with young guys is like, make sure you love it first. Don't be chasing
Mm,
the end result or money or stuff or fame or any of it, because none of that matters when you got to do the hard work. So when you love it, the hard work's easy. When you love it so much, you're not concerned about all the other stuff, the minutia, The minutia is so pointless. It's such a waste of time. Make sure you love it first, and then it's easy to day because like what's going to win overall is just consistency and time spent doing that
Hmm.
thing. And so when you love it, that's easy. If you're trying to get something else out of it, forget about it. Yeah, that would be the one that really stands out for me because when I was coming up, it wasn't a question of, I wasn't concerned about making it or not. I loved training. I loved exploring. To be out on a bike and someone was actually paying you to go, like, just all I have to do is go ride today and eat and sleep. This is fucking cool, man. Like, yeah. So, yeah, don't get caught up in all the other bullshit. It's so pointless and doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, it actually just adds stress and problems to your life.
Hmm. Oh, that's it. That's great. That's great. Again, really appreciate the time. It was awesome, awesome journey you took everyone on. I think everyone's gonna love this one.
Right on. Thanks for your time.
All right, take care. That was Swain Tuft. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, share it with some friends because this is the exclusive place for this podcast. Now I'll leave you with an excerpt from his upcoming book. 6 cans chucked out of the truck window. That was 30 cents for a guy like me. I started picking them up as I rode along, crushing the cans and stuffing them into some garbage sacks that I carried with me as waterproof covers. My mind immediately made it part of the adventure. By the time I made it to the next town, I had $4 or $5, and that was enough to buy a sack of potatoes. I was riding and earning money for food. I was self-sustaining. I felt freer than at any other time in my life. I was living off the land.